welcome into this Thursday before Thanksgiving special, Freightonomics. Now, Zach Strickland here with Thomas Wasson. Thank you. Fresh off the road from the Trimble conference. We'll get an update on that. But we're leading into peak season, or in theory, we call it peak season. And it's typically in trucking or transportation. It is characterized by inflationary spot rates, normally rapidly right before the holiday period. We tend to see capacity come offline. The driver population, they like to take vacations too. Something that a lot of people don't recognize. They, a lot of times we kind of conflate demand spikes with capacity shortage. And a lot of these holiday periods, it's really more about the latter than it is the prior, because a lot of these shippers aren't waiting to the last minute to push a lot of freight. Now, some do, and it does create a little bit of an inflationary process because the freight that moves in front of Thanksgiving, by God, it needs to move.
Gotta go.
It's gotta go. So without further ado, Thomas Wasson, you're fresh off the road at Trimble. I want to hear about, some of the vibe there. Craig was there along with some other people. We'll get to that in a minute. But what's your vibe in the earth right now in the transportation sector?
It's like a Rodney Dangerfield thing. I just flew in. Boy, my legs are tired.
Yeah.
No, it was cool. The Trimble event is wild. Like, talk about an event that punches above its weight. There's like around 800-ish people. Trimble, as you know, has tons of different parts. If you think of TMW, PC Miler, every time I go to a Trimble conference, I learned there was something more that they own. There was something else. So the big deal with them was a brand new TMS. If anyone's worked with it, I did TMW back in the day. It's brand new, which is cool. There's a lot of cool stuff. AI was the buzzwords. They're redoing all their stuff. Kind of like when you bring back, a video game that's the remastered version.
Oh, yeah.
This is like Trimble Remastered or Trimble Plus.
Right.
And so they're very excited about that. But the conference overall I think it was a very good conference. They had a great lineup. Craig got to talk with Angie Iacocello, Lee Krachkov with Bloomberg. I got to meet some people. I did some interviews, so I got around. But, when we're thinking about expectations in the market and stuff, one of the big things was most of the conversations were, I can't make more money. How do I use technology to magically make me more money by cutting costs?
Yeah, so playing defense, of course, is something that a lot of companies like to do in an environment such as this one that doesn't have a lot of growth potential. Or, you can make that argument that there's growth always, but in established businesses, sometimes it's hard to make that risk. And so I think first things first, though, Thomas, we need to set the table, talk about some data, what we're seeing leading into peak season. If you want to count me in, and I'll do my marketing too.
We'll do it on 3. And 3, 2, 1, whammy.
All right, let's start with the O-Tri. O-Tri is still hanging in there. Now, it looks like we're starting to touch on that 2024 level. The positive sign here is that 2024 was actually a period where we thought the market was on the verge of flipping. We did not see this kind of trend line before in the previous couple of years, where you see that upward to the right momentum in our line there. And we don't have the same type of force behind it. However, it is still somewhat elevated. We jumped up just yesterday to 6.16%. And that's up, pretty significantly from where we were, at this point in 2 years ago. But the market continues to show signs of tightening. The O-Tri, of course, is telling us this incrementally, and it's very slow, and it's hard to parse out because it's happening so slowly. Let's go to the next chart. And this is why OTVI is so impressive. Demand is on the floor for the truckload market. This is a 13% year-over-year decline in OTVI. Does not look good from a demand side perspective. We do see a little bit of that spike in volume, these tenders coming out right in front of the holiday. I don't think this is anything meaningful in terms of sustainability or anything like that. But man, October was rough on the OTVI, and November still showing a lot of resistance. Let's go to the next chart. Look at the NTIL spot rates. They don't look quite the same as the tender rejection index. Spot rates are now falling below 2024 levels. This is still not super concerning for me because they're staying elevated despite the amount of demand that is just not moving in the market right now. Shippers appear to be in a very good position with their inventories. It's keeping that sense of urgency low for this time of year, something that also helps inflate rates on the spot market specifically. We're not there yet, but history does tell us that here in the next couple of days, there is a pattern to watch out for in spiking rates. Let's go to the next chart, which is actually a map. WRI, where are rejection rates jumping the most? Kansas City, as well as Denver, Colorado. Some of the kind of not on the radar markets that a lot of people aren't necessarily looking for.
Yeah, and we're getting like when you're looking at those not on the radar markets, those are my favorite ones whenever I was dispatching. And yeah, pull up that chart right there. We got Denver, we got Kansas City. Geography matters. Look at those parts in Oregon as well. So when I think of Denver and Oregon, that's where it takes a day or two to reposition trucks.
Oh, yeah.
You just don't go to Colorado for fun unless you're on vacation or you love skiing. Kansas City is one of those interesting ones. When I look at that market, I'm thinking, are we having some automotive movement? We do have a large distribution center footprint. Kansas is one of those centrally located nodes, so that kind of does tip our hand. Look at poor Baltimore, though, that market in Maryland. Yeah, we need to have that. We need to get the sound effect for that. So that's one of those things where we are seeing some general gradual through that WRI, some increases here. This definitely is in line of seasonal expectations. If I put on my simple Tennessean hat, that tells me that capacity is starting to either front load, reposition, or I'm starting to try to figure out my working tractor percentages, or I'm having some sudden surge from shippers saying, oopsie daisy, I need to get this out before I get in trouble and go on vacation.
Yeah, let's go ahead and pull up the spot market map, because I know a lot of people, they look at rejection rates, and of course I look at them because they're a little bit less emotional. Spot rates, of course, if you've heard me talk about it, they tend to be a little bit, I used to make some myself, so I know what goes into the cake batter there, and it's not all real. But this map is showing us over the last 4 days where are lanes coming out of these markets having more significant increases than decreases. Anything in blue, there's significant increases happening. And when I say significant, I mean like something that is unusual. Yeah. So it's got to be statistically significant. So it can't just be 5 lanes showing a 4% increase. It's got to be a significant amount. So anything in blue, and you can see there is a little bit of a pattern here. It's not as blended. Spot rates are kind of loosening down there in Texas. Kansas City, though, showing up here in some darker blue, and over there in the Northwest, darker blue. And this is the dry van market, mind you.
Check that out. Florida, obviously, we can see that produce season, everything else. The Florida flip makes sense. Parts of Texas, big intra-Texas movement. But look, it almost feels like if you're looking at this map, the red does feel like population centers or places where I need to get out of. But checking out there in the upper areas, the Great Plains, as well as on the West Coast, I'm thinking of California. I'm watching California right now. That's one of the big things, is because similar to the Oregon and the Denver market, it's not as if there's, national carriers don't just have a large organic California population. It takes time to shift capacity out there. Those are one of the things to watch here. And look at Atlanta as well. Yeah. Atlanta is one of the other things I'm keeping an eye on. Yeah.
So, normally you're talking about, this time of year is where the drivers get boundaried. So if they're trying to go home and you want to keep them within a day's travel, 500-mile radius, a lot of the southern tier typically loosens up a little bit, especially from the regional freight standpoint, not the long haul freight. So I'd be curious if Atlanta wasn't feeling some pressure from some long haul demand there that's keeping those rates, moving higher necessarily, because normally it's the southern tier. Like a lot of driver population lives in Florida. And that's something that I would look for at this time of year. And of course, the freight deserts, there's not a lot of volume out there. It doesn't take a lot to move that needle. And that's just where you're keeping drivers away from this time of year.
Yeah, definitely at this time of year when you're thinking about it. So Thanksgiving is the 27th. So right now we're dating ourselves. It's the 20th. As a load planner, I have a unique problem from a carrier standpoint. One, I got a weekend coming up. So I'm coming up near the end of the week. I need to reposition them for a 34 reset or have them somewhere. Maybe they're going to go home. Maybe they're not, or going to stay out. And then the problem is they need to be home by the 26th. So if I'm looking at days I can get productive asset activity, Monday and Tuesday, the 24th and 25th. So if you're trying to figure out well, what do these colors mean? Why does this matter, Thomas? Well, if you're putting on your trucker hat and your trucker brain, I'm already getting conservative 7 days out, because if I do screw it up, I'm going to have to either empty move these assets. It's going to be a very challenging and tricky situation. So we should expect to see continued upticks, because it's going to be the amount of truckload capacity driven. We'll see fleet tractor counts go down below 50% working tractor very easily back in my US Express days. And so this makes sense in terms of seasonal expectations. But what doesn't make sense in seasonal expectations is the volumes. Yeah. And I want to get your thoughts, because we brought up 2 years worth of data. I pulled up the CLAV, which takes out tender rejections.
Right. Which there's not that many of.
Yeah. And it's right now we are in line with 19. Yeah. We're doing better than 18, but every other year since.
It's brutal. The demand side is brutal.
Throwback Thursday.
Yeah, we're going to get into the demand characteristics here in a minute economically, so I definitely want to hit that. But we did get the government to reopen, which, again, I got asked a bunch of questions. How influential is the government shutdown on demand side characteristics? And honestly, like it takes time and it's very mixed in with other things. It typically has a short-term net negative on GDP that gets overcome over time. It kind of recovers. But yeah, I mean, I think you can certainly say that there was some sort of downside to this because people weren't getting paid. Um, so that amount of money not flowing in the economy, but it's hard to quantify that purely. But we did get some numbers coming in. Now they trickled in here from September. So again, we're talking government data. So it's slow. I don't know how much you want to make out of this, but September, they added 119,000 jobs in September. That's well beyond what they were expecting of 50,000 jobs in September. So, but they did revise August downward to a net negative of 4,000 job losses.
No.
So it's hard to look at these figures on like an island. I think the big takeaway here too, unemployment also ticked up to 4.4% from 4.3. That's not a great sign. The way I think about this from a freight and transportation perspective is if the Fed is looking at these figures as a way to cut or lower interest rates yet again in December, that should be beneficial to next year's freight market in terms of investment. Kind of everybody's kind of waiting on the Fed to lower interest rates. They seem to be a little tight based on a lot of the economic data that we come in. The economy is not doing great outside of Wall Street. You know, we talk about this Main Street and Wall Street thing all the time, and the K-shaped stuff economically, that's the haves and the have-nots, and it's the small and the large. There is a lot of that going on in our economy right now. If you are a big business and you are looking to invest and grow right now, it is very, very challenging to predict. This is budget season.
Yep.
If you're a business and you're looking to make a budget for next year, what do you do with all of these policies that are still in flux? I mean, we're still talking about the Supreme Court that's going to rule on the tariffs here in December. You've still got, you know, all these other policies going on, and that not necessarily tariffs alone, but there's other regulatory things. You know, the trucking industry, which is our lead story that I want to, well, not the lead, but it'll be the second story we talk about today, about the CDLs and the enforcement of regulations. Very politicized, very challenging thing to talk about without kind of, you know, really invoking some emotion out of it. But we're going to, I want to remove as much politics as possible, even though that you can't ignore it entirely in that topic. So there's a lot going on here that's really keeping people from really aggressively pursuing any initiatives right now. And I think that's the biggest problem with our economy currently. From a hiring and firing standpoint, it's stagnant. From an investment standpoint, it's nothing. And I think it's just the uncertainty, even though there are reasons to think that this should turn sometime in the next 12 months. I just don't get the sense that we have enough confidence from the businesses to get there.
Well, look at the numbers here. By the numbers here, the job gains, we have the 119,000 non-farm reversed from the 4,000 in August that we lost. Check this out. So who won? Who gained jobs? Healthcare, 43,000. Food services and drinking places, 37,000. And social assistance, 14,000. Who lost? Transportation and warehouse down 25,000. And we lost 3,000 in federal government. So, I mean, that's been honestly, this is why I'm concerned, and I want to get your thoughts. If you're taking care of old people, if you work in healthcare, or if you lost your job and now you're a bartender, congratulations, brother, businesses are booming. But if you work in transportation, warehouse, or manufacturing, or any other stuff that actually drives the economy, life's not good right now. And that's one of the big things I'm thinking about here is that when we're talking about that K-shaped growth, these are warning signs to me because, like, you know, normally in the transportation and warehousing, we want to start building a buffer of workers.
Seasonal growth into the peak
for
retail.
the peak season.
Yeah.
And I had a cool conversation. This is what's wild. The new technologies and the AI and the onboarding. I was at some Samsara webinar, and when they were talking about traditionally we'd wait till the last minute and stock up on these workers, the big seasonal push. They're like, well, with all the cool technologies, we don't really have to go last minute. I forgot to turn in my homework. We can actually start staging this, take a very orderly approach. And so there's just a lot of warning signs right now, especially in the economy, because like you said, there's been a lot of geopolitical and government related moves that are just making life really difficult.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to have a clear path forward at this point without some sort of confidence in something. You can't build mechanisms in a hurricane.
Yep.
You know, it's too late to kind of start doing something once the hurricane hits land. And that's kind of what it feels like economically right now. We've got too many moving parts that people just can't kind of find a foundation and a foothold in. So you were at Trimble, and the first article that we want to cover here is Trucking takeaways from the Trimble, volume down, driver population sliding. John Kingston, of course, covered this. You were there.
Yep.
I want to get your take here. What was kind of the sense? We hit on this earlier, but it looks like it's an ongoing freight recession. That's kind of the big thing is that, and now we've got these policies, especially around driver population influence.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts here? What'd you see?
Well, one of the big things was definitely doing more with less, route optimization, making sure compliance, camera, trying to figure out ways. But frontline for the immigration wars, catalyst towards a stronger freight market. It's such a tough situation right now because, we have a very aggressive government focus on drivers, but it's like Goldilocks. How many of them are actually going to make a difference? And when we talked about that demand number, will it really matter? Because demand is being impacted by the trade wars, consumer vibes are off. And so, I did some interviews, and when I talked with the CEO and other folks, one of the big conversations was, if you can't figure out what the rest of the world's going to work on yourself. That whole thing where it's like, well, if you can't control what's going on outside of your life, go to the gym. Well, for these companies, they're going to metaphorically go to the gym, get themselves in shape, get lean, get mean, get your operations really fixed with this technology stack. And then at least you're going to be in a position where when it does change, when this cloudy weather gives way to sunny skies, that's going to be one of the things. But yeah, the immigrant driver population, I had some conversations with folks, and I know Kingston and Noy and them actually were doing more journalists. I was doing interviews. So I got to have fun from a media standpoint. That's still one of the big questions. You still have it 50-50. What's funny is some folks still talk about labor shortages and truck driver shortages. And then some folks have seen the light and they're like, well, I'm going to make sure that the technology is making sure I'm legit and then I don't have to deal with it. Yeah. It's so hard because these large companies are already doing what they're supposed to do. So we're talking about non-domiciled and all these H-2B and all this other stuff. And what's the status of my drivers and if they're going to be revoked. Most of these companies, they don't really deal with that. That's the funny part. Yeah. So this is still in this very quasi area. It's like quantum physics. Unless it's observed, you don't know what the heck it's doing.
It's not. Yeah, we don't have a lot of good, clean data around it because they haven't been forced to do this. This is part of the problem is that the FMCSA and, of course, the state regulatory agencies have not been in alignment for decades on any of this. And that leads us to our next article, which, if you hear me about going to FreightWaves.com and reading no other article, I want you to read John Gallagher's article. I know the regulatory articles out there, but the California CDL fight signals national enforcement scrutiny. This is the article to read. There are a couple of quotes in here that I want to read. This is, of course, in relation to the 17,000 non-domiciled commercial driver's licenses following a federal audit revealed that the state illegally issued them to foreign drivers. Now, this is very politicized.
Oh, yeah.
So we have to be careful here because you've got Sean Duffy and Gavin Newsom, blue, Sean Duffy, red, obviously more attack and defend here on the red to blue side. But it is, there's some misconstruing of facts on both sides of the table because they have to make things very hyperbolic to get people to listen. We've got these quotes in here from Greg Reed, who is a partner in a law firm, Hanson Bridget. He's quoted in here, "The public back and forth between Governor Newsom and Secretary Duffy is a distraction from the reality that the DOT's evolving enforcement and regulatory initiatives to address safety and security will have a meaningful impact on both the public transit and commercial transportation industries." So he goes on to say, "This is not a California issue. It is the product of having a CDL licensing regime implemented by 50 different state driver licensing agencies, each influenced by state politics, operating under prior federal guidance that paid too little attention to transportation safety and security." This is a very factual, objective statement, regardless of where you lean. The FMCSA has had no money to enforce a lot of this stuff. It's had no pressure to kind of it's got no support to lean into some of these state agencies. The fact is we can't figure out how many non-domiciled licenses there are from these states that don't report on these numbers tells you all you need to know. This has been a very slipshod way of accounting for what's going on here, and there's not been a lot of accountability, whether you agree with why we're pulling these people out of the market or not. I think, a great thing for everybody to listen to, too, is the Craig Fuller and Ken Adamo debate, DAT versus Sonar there. But there were some very nice points drawn out in that debate about kind of arguing about the numbers. We should not be arguing about numbers here. Like, this is something we should already know. And the fact that we don't know what these numbers are and we're kind of, trying to scramble. I think Noel Perry put out some numbers. That's where the 600,000 number came from. He does a very good job with numbers, by the way. It's the fact that we don't watch this and we haven't been holding it accountable tells you that this is something that needs attention.
Yeah. I'll give you two very spicy takes on that. So I majored in political science. Who would have thought it would be useful? Thank you. Thank you, the simulation theory. Two things. One, the quote is completely correct. As your resident trucking expert, all states have been doing some form of sketchiness for decades. Unfortunately, the FAA has 45,000 employees. The FMCSA has around 1,100. So it's kind of like a very tricky situation we have to deal with each state to enforce the stuff, kind of like the mob boss. The second thing is the reason, why do you see picking on poor old Gavin Newsom? Well, some say poor old, some call him the devil incarnate. I don't care. I have to get paid to talk about trucks. So I'm going to tell you about how this impacts with trucks. So you have an administration right now that is fighting a battle of optics. Every time you have an immigration raid and it takes a teary-eyed family, it looks really bad. And so, bad Republicans, boogeyman. Well, how do you challenge that if you're a political consultant? Well, you need something equally as bad optics-wise, which is an immigrant slamming into a family minivan, killing everyone. And so we have a battle right now. Why is trucking in the limelight? Why are random right-wing publications deciding to pick it up? Well, I will tell you, my friend, because right now business is a booming if you want to rile people up and get page views. And so I want to have a word of caution, because what you're seeing right now is Newsom will probably have a bid in 2028. How do you attack somebody with their political aspirations? You start trying to label them as sticky. That's why it's ironic. California gets crap for the non-domiciled. Florida's loosey-goosey. Indiana's loosey-goosey. Texas has some of the largest amounts of non-domiciled CDLs. It's not a red or a blue problem. It's a nationwide safety-related issue that is being politicized, because how do you get your boss to like you? Well, you start trying to attack and pick fights with various governors to show that your administration is doing stuff, even though their budget is a shoestring with 2 pieces of gum and some tape. And so that's my spicy take, dear listener, is this is distracting from the one good thing, because we've given the FMCSA a hard time. We talked about this politicization. They're actually doing something. And I know it may not feel like much, and it's not going to feel like enough, because everyone wants everything fast these days, like going through a McDonald's drive-through. But if you look at the 20 plus years when I've had conversations with people, they've said, we've never seen the FMCSA actually be this aggressive.
Yeah.
For like decades.
Well, they're also empowered to be.
And they're empowered to be. And it's random. And the final thing is, speaking of the data, the biggest challenge right now is the only folks who have good data are lobbying companies. The ATA is the very only place that has good data on driver turnover. That's why you get to say there's a driver shortage. So the ATA did not keep tabs on how many immigrants they're hiring.
Right.
So we don't have a very good data set. And if you even look at the government data and the jobs data and everything else, we had to go through this entire heaven and earth 6 months to count how many non-domiciled CDLs. Right. And so one of the things I want to caution people is don't get in the Kool-Aid. Trucking accidents happen. It doesn't matter if you're non-domiciled or domiciled. It's a statistical math problem right now that is also a skill issue. Yeah. Out of how many millions of miles will one of these things slam into somebody? Now, you can do things like hire better drivers, have better standards in place. You can reduce that number, but it is a math problem. And so when we put on our politicized hats and we get all like, I can't believe this, and this administration or that administration, this has been a decades-long issue that it's been a labor-related one. These have been structural trends, and so it's not as if we're going to magically untie this Gordian knot. And so that's my little soapbox. Right. I get really tied up, because it's one thing to if everyone's culpable. You're the trucking expert here, Thomas, and that's absolute. I mean, a lot of people agree with what you're saying. So Steedle points out that 17,000 CDLs represents over 9% of California's for-hire carrier base. So that should make a meaningful impact. But again, this is where they're issued, not necessarily where they operate. So I wouldn't say that that's an exact way of looking at it. But let's look at tender rejections out of California, otri.ca, and see if we're seeing anything yet. And the answer is no, not really. This is not happening, at least in the tender data as of yet. We did talk about the spot market out west being a little bit spicy right now. And there is a lane that I want to talk about here in just a second. So let's go ahead and get into that. So the next article, and I'm just going to touch on this, is that
October as container volumes, China recovery diverged. So it's basically talking about container volumes are basically down. Rare October as container volumes drop, China recovery diverges. Stuart Chills writes this is a fantastic piece on, the fact that we've moved out of seasonality. If we pull up the IOTI, we can see this cleanly. Like anybody that has sonar or watches Freightonomics and has looked at the IOTI, the measure of bookings of container volumes moving into the United States, there's about a 14 to 21 day lead time before all these numbers hit or land in the United States. And you can see it's down. It's down significantly versus the last 2 years. Nobody thinks 2023 was a big year for imports, but it did actually recover towards the end of the year because everybody's inventories came back or went down, so they had to recover. So this is a nuanced trend. I don't know that we're going to be able to apply it forward because this year has been unlike any other in that early peak season pull forward environment.
Yeah, look at the early bumps.
Yeah.
Check out the bump in July. So we had the one peak, and then remember the April tariff stuff, the other peak. So if you see on the very far left, we have the lunar.
The 145%. Yeah, well, that's Lunar New Year.
Yes, we have Lunar New Year, and then we have the big peak that is out of season because of the tariff boogeyman. Yeah. But look at that July. Here's the remarkable story that we had mentioned and reported on earlier was that we had more crap coming in during that big old mountain right there in the center of that map than we had during like COVID, and the supply chain's like, whatever, dog, I'm good.
Yeah.
Which
and of
is,
course, this kind of leads into the, well, what next question, because it looks like this tells me that shippers are very confident in their inventory levels at this point leading into the peak season. Normally, if they don't have enough, you see a little bit of a spike in October where volumes kind of recover out of that golden week trough that you have in early October. We did not have that. This year. We're really not seeing it. Now, it could start to percolate here as we hit December, but so far, not so much. Now, the last article and last point I want to pull in here, because this relates to the import volumes, and it's my chart of the week. I rarely talk about my chart of the week on Freightonomics, but for those of you that know, I write a chart of the week every week, most weeks, I should say. But truckload's value in critical lane is on the rise despite weak demand. And again, this is kind of goes along with the storyline of inflation occurring despite demand not necessarily being there for trucking procurement. This lane, now this is going to be a bit of a spaghetti chart, but certainly check out the article if you want to get a little deeper here. But the purple line, that's the contract rate for Los Angeles to Chicago. The green line, that's the spot rate for Los Angeles to Chicago. This is a very liquid lane, as we call it, a very dense, heavy lane. Intermodal has drawn, and that orange line is the intermodal contract rate going from Los Angeles to Chicago. It's gone down. The other two are going up. Intuitively, this makes no sense. However, if you think about the economics here, things that are getting placed on a truck, why would it go up so fast if there's not enough demand? Because there's not. There's no data that supports there's a lot of demand going on trucking in this lane. But the demand that is going in this lane has to move and has to get there. So we're seeing two things happening. A removal of low urgency freight, stuff that just can meander on the rails. It's intermodal is trucking plus one in this lane specifically. It's plus 4 if you're doing the interchange. And you're also getting the elevated sense of urgency freight kind of building as a bigger proportion of that share of the freight moving in this lane. And that's why we're seeing this inflationary pressure. So if the market turns and we start to see more urgent freight and we're seeing leaner inventory levels, this is a warning sign of what can happen as the value of service in trucking is actually going up right now, and nobody can see it.
Because once Cali flips, I've been there before. Cali can flip. I was a load planner at US Express. We go for a -5, -10, more trucks than loads. Boom, plus 50. Why is that purple up? Look at that green. See those instances where it goes above contract?
Yep.
They are paying a premium because when it does flip and when we go California dreaming and every owner-operator comes out there, you got to have that locked in. That makes sense. Why? Because from my personal experience, I hate poor load planners. Zach Bivens was the guy who did it. He would just hate on life around this time of year, plus 50, plus 70. 75 rolling on everything. So it makes sense. Keep an eye out on California. It's the Golden State for a reason, and maybe we'll make money off of it. Who knows?
Yeah, so that's the big lesson for the week. Watch out. California rates even going up, even though there's not a ton of freight moving. Peak season style. Have a great week.